Wow. First of all, this is incredible. 300 plus people in the room right now. Obviously, a much larger audience than we would typically have at ESAW. So I guess that is one of the silver linings to being able to do this virtually. Welcome to those of you who are not from New England. I think there's a couple folks in the crowd that are listening that are from far away. So welcome. Before I jump into thanking our sponsors and the folks who are going to be talking tonight, I also wanted to extend a big appreciation again to you all for being here. It is a small backcountry skiing community, relatively speaking, here in New England, particularly in the Mount Washington Valley. And there are, it's a great chance that we will be sharing a skin track, mainly because there's only one going up Mount Washington, at least on the east side. And a skin track or boot pack or be at the top of a line together. And it's just really, really nice knowing that this many people are looking to get their education started early. So again, thank you for being here and finding time in your week. Huge thanks to the Mount Washington Avalanche Center and the entire Snow Ranger crew. Once winter gets underway, I think we all, I'll speak for myself anyway, kind of take it for granted that report comes out every morning, that it's detailed, well-written, thoughtfully done. But there are a bunch of people behind the scenes putting in some hard work to make sure that happens. So thank you to the Avalanche Center. Tonight, specifically, thank you so much to Acadia Mountain Guides, East Coast Avalanche Education, Northeast Mountaineering, and Sinnet Mountain Guides. You're going to hear from a representative from each of those guide companies. I had a long speech written out, but we don't have enough time, but I can't articulate enough or say enough. The depth of knowledge that's in the room, quote unquote, right now is absolutely incredible. So we're very, very lucky to have folks from all those organizations, all those companies here tonight to talk to us about a variety of different topics. And last but not least, before I jump into the schedule, also huge thank you to Black Diamond. They are tonight's title sponsor. Tyler, who's from East Coast Avalanche Education, also works with Black Diamond. They were kind enough to donate a beacon for tonight's event. So everybody that registered is automatically entered into a raffle. Somebody will be randomly picked and we'll get in touch with you to send you that beacon. So thank you so much to Black Diamond. We really, really appreciate it. So this is how things are going to unfold. It's already almost 5 past, so we want to keep to a pretty strict timeline tonight. At 7:15, now John, for those of you that are already in the room, you saw that transition happen. But John from Acadia Mountain Guides is going to present on the danger scale. I'll say this, something that, I'm sorry, not danger scale, my bad, John. I had Dave written down there. John's going to present on how we choose partners and the type of partners that we choose when we go into the backcountry. I was lucky enough to work with John Tierney for a while, and I can tell you that in this particular topic, he has a wealth of knowledge. I won't pretend to even share any of his stories, but they are profound and very, very helpful educational tools. So 7:15, John will go. 7:30, Nick from Sinnet Mountain Guides will go. I'm going to let Nick do his own introduction because working alongside Nick all winter long, he probably doesn't want me doing it. But he's going to present on how we identify avalanche terrain. Again, really important, especially for us East Coast skiers. Our avalanche terrain tends to be pretty obvious. We have an entire part of our mountain called the Gulf of Slides, kind of like detailed it out for us. But when we go travel west, it can be, a little more nuanced. So Nick's going to walk us through that. And then 7:45, we're going to have Dave go. Dave is going to present on the danger scale. Again, something that at face value can seem pretty obvious, but once we dive into the weeds a little bit, there's a lot of nuance there that needs to be unpacked. So that'd be at 7:45. And then 8 o'clock, we're going to have Tyler present, all right, on how to read a forecast. This is especially important for us New England skiers because there's a lot of information that is put into that forecast every single day. Not to say that it isn't elsewhere, but we just have a different type of terrain, a different type of forecast, which Frank has been changing over the years. But it's a really, really important tool to get to know well. And then at 8:15, Frank is going to facilitate a question and answer session. So if you want to put any question, any of the questions that come up for you, if you want to put those into the chat function while the speakers are speaking, we will collect those, put them all together, and then at 8:15 we'll redirect those back to the speakers to get their feedback and get their thoughts on those questions and inquiries. And thank you to Bridget for doing that. And let's see what else is on my list. And then we'll have a wrap up at 8:30, some closing thoughts for you, and then we'll all go enjoy the rest of our Friday nights. The last thing that I have, hopefully Frank's back at some point soon here. I also want to give a huge thanks to Joe Klementovich. So Zoom seems like something that's very, very easy at face value. And then you try and get 400 people in a room at the same time, and it ends up being a little trickier than you initially expected. So the last, over 400 now. The last 2 weeks, I have been witness to Joe's tireless work putting all of this together. And so, if you see Joe on a river, on the mountain, definitely buy him a coffee, buy him a beer. Because he's put a lot of hard work into making sure that we can be here tonight and hear from our incredible guests. So is Frank back?
I am back.
Awesome. All right, you got it, Frank.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Internet's a little flaky out here in the country, but just wanted to kick it off. Thank you all for your interest. Thanks for taking some time to join us today, and especially thanks for all the panelists who are here to share their knowledge with all of us. And with that, we're going to kick off with John Tierney. Take it away, John. Don't forget to unmute yourself, John.
I should be.
Yep, we got you.
Okay, great. All right, are you seeing the slideshow?
Yep.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Okay. All right, well, thank you to Frank and Blake and Joe and everyone else who helped make this happen for sure. And welcome to all the 400 plus participants. That's great to see. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to kind of jump right into things. I was given the topic, or picked the topic of picking your partner, and I think that's one of the most important decisions that we can make out there in the backcountry, no matter what kind of terrain we're traveling in, whether it's rock or ice or snow or rivers. But your partner is a big part of how the whole event kind of unfolds. So I'm going to share a few stories that have happened in my life, which has spanned 40 plus years traveling in the mountains, and then try to wrap up with a few bullet points or suggestions that I hope will be useful to some of you. None of this is rocket science. It's all common sense, but the problem with common sense, as many have said, is not a lot of us often have it. So we'll see if we can just remind ourselves about a few things. I think, this year in particular, we're going to see a big move, or potentially see a big move from inbound skiing to out-of-bound skiing. And, we have to approach it a little bit differently. I go skiing all the time by myself at Sugarloaf or Sunday River and places like that. And I don't worry too much about it because help is really near, and all I have to do is yell a little loudly and someone will call a ski patrol and I'll be taken care of. And I don't really have to worry about too many dangers there except for my own skiing ability and ability to negotiate the terrain. Once I step into the backcountry, though, that all changes. And like we say in wilderness medicine, you are the help. So we really have to think about that when we organize our team. The rules have really changed, the rules of the road. So, inbounds versus out of bounds, very different approach to how we might take things as we move away from the trailhead. I also want to talk a little bit about guiding versus recreating. And, I spend most of my time in the mountains leading a person or people. And in all honesty, most of the time, I don't have a lot of backup, as most guides do. It's like I am having to play the risk meter a little more conservatively than I might play it if I was out there on my own, because I don't have anybody that can necessarily get me out of an avalanche debris pile or with any real speed or anything like that. Nor do I have other people to necessarily bounce informed decisions off of in the winter environment. So in a guiding realm, I approach things quite a bit differently than how I might approach them recreating. But even recreating, I think it's very important to keep a few things in mind. So one of the best stories that I can share with you to start with was just recreating with my then girlfriend, now wife. who we were rock climbing in Red Rocks, and you know, I was all excited to take her up really long routes, which I love to guide out there, and now I get to go and have fun and climb. And she's like, well, you know, I need to know how to get you down if something happens to you, if you take me up all of these routes. And I thought to myself, wow, I hadn't thought really too much about that, because as a guide, I just kind of know that I have to deal with it and not get myself in trouble. So we spent 3 days actually working on self-rescue skills and improvised rescue skills before she really said, okay, we can go climbing now and go have fun. So I thought that was a really important message to kind of remind me that, you know, in my own partner choice, and that helped me solidify, you know, my future relationship too. So it can be very useful. For the most part, I spend most of my time when I'm recreating in the mountain with a person with fairly similar skill set to mine and a similar kind of risk tolerance to mine. And that's my senior guide, Dick Chassé, here as well. So he could just as easily be sharing this conversation with you tonight, and he might well be listening in as well. And if you have a chance to listen to any of his podcasts, I'd highly encourage you to do that. But I want to talk about something that happened to me about 17 years ago on a day when I was preparing. I was 2 days shy of my ski mountaineering guides exam, which for me was my final exam in pursuing my IFMJ guide certification. I'd been in Alaska training for the last 4 or 5 weeks, pretty hard, and training and guiding out west most of that winter as well. And, you know, 2 days before the exam, if you're not ready by then, you're not going to be ready. At least that's how we sort of felt. But then, you know, you start to have a little bit of doubt in your head, and suddenly people are, well, let's go train. So we decided, a few of us decided to go out and train. And you couldn't have found a stronger team. Everybody there is taking their ski mountaineering exam. We have Himalayan guides. We have, you know, leaders in the AIRI program, you know, at the head of the educational program, things like that. We got a lot of really talented people. And so off we went. So we had a very strong team. And that's both a benefit and potentially a problem, because it does introduce some human heuristics to the equation. And that being, nothing can happen to us because we're just good enough. You know, we're a strong team. Everybody here has a lot of technical skills. Everybody here is a good skier. Everybody can read terrain. Everybody can navigate, et cetera, et cetera. There's very few weaknesses here, or we wouldn't be standing here getting ready to take this 12 days of hell exam. So we went off with a specific goal of navigating in whiteout conditions in difficult terrain. And this predated any modern communication like cell phones and things like that. So to make a long story short, we didn't get caught in an avalanche per se. We did get caught in a slough at one point, but that was kind of a small detail, and we kind of managed that. But the avalanche conditions were considerable. It was snowing with the forecast to go for another 2 to 3 days of snow. And there wasn't any real backup for us should anything happen in the form of a helicopter rescue or anything like that. We chose a fairly difficult objective, I would say, especially given our stated objective, which was really whiteout navigation, to practice that. And we could have really practiced that alongside of the road. But what kind of got us was, you know, our fitness was good, our desire was good. We wanted to hit some big terrain, and off we went. Now, and in the midst of that, I ended up falling through a cornice and getting pretty badly hurt. And that's where the benefit of a strong team really came to help us. Because I had a strong team, I'm able to sit here and talk to you today. Because if I had not had a strong team, that wouldn't have been the case for sure. So, you know, in both cases, there's a benefit to a strong team, but we have to be cautious about the human heuristic that can sometimes create for us, because it's certainly, when we evaluate that, we could have met that objective by simply skiing alongside, you know, the Worthington Glacier, you know, close to the road, and never had been in that situation at all, to where one of us ended up getting hurt. And it could have easily been all three of us that went off the cornice that day, in which case probably none of us would be here today. But so that's the first kind of story to share in a nutshell. The second point I wanted to make is something I had the good fortune to spend time with Paul Petzel, who some of you may know as a mountaineer and alpinist, but also the founder of Outward Knowles and the WEA, a very early outward bound instructor and instrumental in the development of EXA mountain guides in the Tetons. And as many of you know, Paul climbed well into his 80s. But one of his famous things that he would say when he interviewed new candidates at Knowles would be this statement of, tell me what you don't know. And I think that's an important thing to glean out of your partners, because we're all so willing to share what we do know. It's like, oh, I can do this and I can do that, and I know first aid, and I know how to read a compass, you know, how to navigate, and well, I know the mountain really well, but what don't we know? So I think that's a really good question to share amongst your team. Everybody needs to be able to figure out what elements are they not so comfortable with, what don't they know, and Paul had a great way of kind of saying that in his crotchety old Western voice for us. So I always remembered that. So a few things to think about. Goal alignment. Is everybody in your group happy skiing by the big terrain when you're going to pass right by it? Or do you need to ski the big terrain? And this is another good friend of mine, Matt Wade, who now works in the AMJ office and is really helping to promote access for us out there in the backcountry. But Matt and I trained together in 2006. He had guided for me a few years prior to that. But we spent most of the winter of 2006 preparing for my ski exam once again, once I was healthy again. And we skied together all winter. And we did a particular trip in the Cascades, the Forbidden Tour one time. And we did that with another ski guide who was, you know, a friend of ours and all. But during the trip, it was kind of clear, even though we're all strong skiers and all good at what we did, that we weren't agreeing with decisions necessarily that the other person was making. And Matt was a very good avalanche technician and a very good skier. And I came at it more with the kind of the broader and bigger mountain sense, I guess you would say, was my contribution to the team. But having spent a lot of time in big alpine terrain. So we worked very well as a team, but we were constantly facing decisions where we were in disagreement with our third partner. And so when that trip ended, we kind of made the decision, you know, that's probably the last time we'll ski with that person as a team of three at least. And we all ended up on the exam, and you know, it went well for some of us and not so well for others. But the bottom line was, you know, we thought we had a strong team, but as the trip evolved, it didn't. So in the future, we just made the decision that we're gonna just avoid that person until that person can show us that they can, you know, follow decisions that we're making as a group. You know, for example, we wanted to circumnavigate a pretty big slope with a lot of avalanche hazard, and you know, he wanted to ski it, and we're like, well, we don't want to ski it, and we can't talk you out of it, so we'll ski around it and do the best we can to support you, but you know, you're kind of on your own if you decide to do that. So you have to be happy skiing by the big terrain sometimes. You can't always take it on. What does it take to turn around? That's a really important really good question to ask yourself. It took me 3 trips before I successfully completed the Hout route, you know, with clients and with private friends as well, because of weather and because of avalanche conditions. And it's a very well-traveled route with people on every legs of it virtually every day. But some days you get out of the hut and you're just like, today it's not happening. We're skiing down to the local ski area and we're skiing in the little village. And maybe we'll get back on the route and maybe it won't. But what does it take to turn around? That can be very difficult when you've spent a lot of money, a lot of time. It's your only time off for the year. And all of a sudden the weather is not cooperating or the snow is not cooperating. So another good question to ask. Confidence and competence. People can be confident, but they aren't necessarily competent. So the question you really need to stare at your friend and say is look them straight in the face and say to yourself, do I trust you if I am 3 feet under the snow to effect a quick rescue and to take care of me? And if you can't answer absolutely yes to that question, then maybe you need to reconsider either your partner or at least your objective, so you're not getting yourself into harm's way. But think about the skills they might have and that you have. What mountain sense do they have? What snow sense do they have? What are their rescue skills? What are their medical skills? Are they willing to practice any of these things with you as a team before you leave the trailhead? Think little things you can do. Give people a little card to carry in their ski helmet or to carry in their back pocket so it reminds them about some of the things they need to do if something bad does happen. Who to call, how to orchestrate a rescue, key factors to look for in the snowpack, you know, how to use your beacon if needed, things like that, just simple things. Some of these things are things that guides do kind of as a regular course of action as well to try and stack the odds in their favor a little bit when they go out. But certainly a recreationalist can do that too. Just make up some little note cards. Fitness and gear, you know, I've always said to my students that it doesn't really matter what you wear when you travel if you're all wearing the same kinds of things. So let me give you an example. Someone could go to, you know, IME or Ragged Mountain or an outdoor store and outfit themselves with the most modern, up-to-date, technologically sound gear, side zips on everything, breathable layers, etc. And their friend could be out there in, you know, wool pants and wool base layers and no side zips and waterproof pants and things like that. Both will be successful in the mountains. I mean, people climbed mountains years and years ago with cotton tents and cotton pants. We don't really think of that today. We think that's a no-no. But ultimately, they did it because they had patience and they wouldn't go at a pace where they would sweat. They would stop and they would build camp so they could dry out. So today, if our group is sort of homogenous in how they're dressed and prepared, it makes it easier to travel because it might take everybody just 2 minutes to stop, take a layer off, change their crampons, put their skis on, do things like that. Where everybody's dressed differently, one person takes 15 minutes to do that, and the other person is now freezing because it took them 2 minutes to do that. So just having similar gear or similar clothing can put everybody kind of on the same page. The same thing with fitness. You know, if everybody is kind of super fit, hard charger, you can do long days, but you can't do a long day if one person can barely run 2 or 3 miles a day and the other person can run 15 miles a day. Those make it very difficult. So that 15 mile per day person has to be willing to back their pace off. So similar fitness, similar gear, similar ski setups make repairs easier. You might know how to fix your bindings if everybody has a certain model of bindings, or at least close. It's certainly easier to repair them if everybody's got either tech bindings or either frame bindings. But when you get everything mixed up and you've got 12 different pair of bindings out there, it becomes very hard to repair things. So just thinking about that, who's got, you know, do you know how to fix what you have out there? Another important thing to think about. But I think it kind of goes along with choosing your partner because everybody brings what they have to the table. So when you're selecting gear, you're selecting clothing, try and think about that, who you're traveling with. You don't have to go big, you know, I don't know what the mentality change is, but there's something that happens when we move from inbounds to out of bounds. Suddenly we're inbounds, we're very happy skiing 20 to 25 degree slopes. The absolute steepest part of Sugarloaf that I can find is 38 degrees. And that seems pretty steep when you look down it and it's icy. But yet people will go in the backcountry where they're used to skiing 20 to 25, maybe 28 degree slopes. And suddenly they're not even talking about 30 degree slopes. It's like if it's not 40, they're not skiing it. And that's just not the mentality. You've got to reverse that mentality and say, well, geez, inbounds, I struggle when it gets to be above 30, 35 degrees, especially if it's not smooth skiing. Maybe I only want to take the 20 or 25 degree slope out there in the backcountry. So are you all on the same page with that? You know, you can explore beautiful terrain. I mean, this is a picture of going up toward cracked ice in Valdez. And the top of this is very steep and pretty difficult, but you have just beautiful, beautiful glacier skiing for kilometer after kilometer if you just go to the base of it and just ski out. It's an easy out to the road. If you have visibility, you can see the road the whole way. If you can't, you just take a bearing and you head that direction. And as long as you don't fall through any slot, which the lower you get, the safer you are, you're going to have a great day and you don't have to be in harm's way. So, you know, starting with your friends, if you don't know them really well, simplify your objective, okay? The bond of the rope, it takes time to develop. Years ago, you didn't go skiing or climbing if you didn't know the person really well and climb with them every weekend. Today, social media, you get on it. Hey, you want to ski this weekend? Away you go. So you really have to form that bond with your friends. Ask them, are they willing to change? Have they made a plan for a turnaround? Do you have all these things talked about ahead of time? If you find snow that you're not confident in, are you willing to go downhill? Sometimes we have a few rules. Are they willing to follow the rules, like being separated on an ascent? Maybe you can't talk so well. Are they willing to stop and look at the snow and see if there's something that you're surprised by? Gather some clues that might change your mind. Those are things to think about. Most importantly, we need to be really humble. This was reiterated to me by Jackie Peso, who's a freestyle, you know, one of the big mountain free skiers that you may know about on the Free Ride World Tour. And she and her now husband, Rainey, came to Tuckerman Ravine one time, not too long ago, and they hadn't really been there. And so here are two of the world's best big mountain skiers, and it was moderate conditions. And Jackie said, you know, we came up, we look at the mountain, and we decided to go home. We just weren't feeling it today. And so I feel like I always tell that to the people in my avalanche classes, because if two world-class skiers like that can come up to Tuckerman and say, you know, just not happening today, and it's moderate conditions, then the rest of us can do that too. So it's super important to be really humble about how we travel in the mountains. And if we do that, and here's kind of the outline of my goals, just in summary, or my points, you know, goal alignment, risk tolerance, core skills and competence, your fitness and gear, simple objectives, be flexible, be humble, and be a good friend to each other out there. If we do that, we can travel all over the world. Chick-Chocs, Japan, Katahdin, Mount Washington. Nature will let you travel there if you have enough patience. So those are my closing words, and thanks for your time, and enjoy the mountains out there.
All right. Thank you so much, John. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, I've got a lot of questions, but I know I'm not allowed to ask them. So we're gonna keep moving on.
Blake, do you want to just take the question we got from the group, or move on?
Bridget, if you don't mind, we'll save them for that 8:15, just so
Okay.
everybody can keep rolling, and then we'll just kind of send them all in one big chunk to the presenters, if that's all right. But yeah, so we had a little conversation going on behind the scenes. We're gonna do one last change. We're actually gonna have Dave Lotman go first, because according to Dave, his presentation segues very, very well into Nick's presentation. So we're just gonna do one last change. We're gonna hear from Dave Lotman right now, and then we'll hear from Nick, and then from Tyler. All right, Dave, you're up.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you, Blake and Frank and Joe, for putting this all together. I'm really happy to be here and super stoked for this upcoming winter. Let me just get my right screen share going here. All right, I found the right button. All right. So the North American Avalanche Danger Scale at its roots is a tool that forecasters use to convey the current risk of avalanches in the terrain that we like to recreate in. It's a starting point in your tour planning, and I hope in the next 10 minutes to improve your ability to use this scale in your own decision-making process. It's really the first thing I do every morning when I wake up in the winter, is get online and look up what the local or what the regional rating is and read the discussion. Tyler is going to go into more detail about how to read the avalanche discussion. And then later, right after this session, Nick's going to be talking about how to pick avalanche terrain based on what you're reading in the bulletin. The National Avalanche Center's created a great 3-minute video with some fantastic visuals that can help illustrate some of the nuances of this scale. So I'm going to share that video first, and then I'm going to follow up with some national, regional, and local statistics, along with a couple of personal stories to think about.
On the slopes you plan to climb or descend. Avalanche terrain can be defined as snow-covered slopes steeper than about 30 degrees and any terrain underneath these slopes. In a simple sense, avalanche danger is a function of the size of potential avalanches and the possibility of encountering one. Safe travel in avalanche terrain involves understanding consequence. Large avalanches are obviously dangerous. However, in terrain where we can be pushed over cliffs, banged into trees, or buried in depressions. The North American Avalanche Danger Scale is a tool used by avalanche forecasters to communicate the potential for avalanches to cause harm or injury to backcountry travelers. The scale consists of 5 ascending danger levels that focus on travel advice and provide an actionable starting place for your daily planning. The assigned avalanche danger applies only to avalanche terrain. Danger ratings cover broad areas in general terms, and it is your job to make slope-specific assessments. In general, when conditions are more dangerous, the places you can safely go in the terrain become more limited. Low avalanche danger does not mean no danger, but under these conditions, you can travel safely if you understand that there may be unstable snow on isolated features and in extreme terrain. Moderate danger means you need to have heightened caution and carefully evaluate or avoid areas in the terrain that are identified in that day's avalanche advisory. Under considerable danger, avoid avalanche terrain if you don't have the skills and experience to move through terrain carefully. Human-triggered avalanches are likely, and careful evaluation, route finding, and decision-making are essential. It is prudent to avoid avalanche terrain on high and extreme days, regardless of your experience. Your safe options in the terrain become limited to non-existent. Finally, remember that you control your own risk. For example, you can assume high levels of risk on a low danger day by choosing to enter consequential terrain. Conversely, you can minimize your risk on a high danger day by simply avoiding avalanche terrain altogether. The avalanche danger scale is a starting point in your daily planning process, but in the end, you are in charge and you make the choice.
All right, really like the visuals in that video. Hope you enjoyed that as well. We're going to take a closer look now at the danger scale and how much information is actually contained within. There's 5 columns of information in the danger scale: the danger level, an associated graphic in the second column, specific travel advice in the third column, likelihood of avalanches, and avalanche size and distribution. The system's color coded, so it's 5 tiers going from green, which represents low, up to red and black, representing high and extreme danger. The graphics in the second column illustrate how much caution you should be using or whether you should be avoiding avalanche terrain altogether. Travel advice provides specific recommendations, but in very general terms. You're still going to need to read the accompanying forecast discussion or the bulletin to identify where certain isolated features might be. Under the likelihood of avalanche column, you'll find words like possible, likely, and certain. These are used to describe the chances of both natural and human-triggered avalanches. And the distinction between these 2 types of avalanches is important, especially when it comes down to trip planning. Finally, in the last column, we look at avalanche size and distribution. How big are we talking here? Just a little slough off a tin roof, or is the sky falling and we should get in a bunker? How widespread is the issue? Is there just one little speck of unstable snow on Mount Washington that we can just walk around? Or has the National Weather Service just issued a special avalanche warning for the entire White Mountain region? It's important to note down in the bottom that no rating or one of our local general advisories does not ensure that avalanches will not happen. In January of 2016, I watched 5 people get caught and carried in an avalanche in the chute, which is up in Tuckerman Ravine, right next to my avalanche class. During that time, we were under a general advisory, so we weren't up to the 5-tier system yet. You can Google avalanche in the chute if you want to read more about that incident. Historically, most avalanche deaths happen during either a moderate or considerable rating. There have been many conversations of the interpretation of moderate to mean doable. This is not what moderate means. Under the 4th column in the avalanche danger scale, the likelihood of avalanches under a moderate rating states that human-triggered avalanches are possible. And under the 5th column, size and distribution, it's noted that there could be, quote, large avalanches in isolated areas. My first experience with avalanches and death in the mountains occurred in Tuckerman Ravine in November of 2002, when 4 people were caught and carried by an avalanche. 2 were fully buried who did not survive. I remember when I walked by the avalanche board at Pinkham Notch that morning that the rating was posted at moderate. I don't think I stopped to read the bulletin at the time because I didn't know there was a bulletin that accompanied it. I just looked at the word moderate and thought, well, we'll be fine. Later that night, though, I did sit down and read through the bulletin. And the only place the forecasters were concerned about that it would be, quote, possible for someone to trigger a sizable avalanche was exactly where that party chose to ascend. The rating and the bulletin that day were accurate. The complexity of a moderate rating was once explained to me by my friend and former Mount Washington Avalanche and their snow ranger, Jeff Lane. He said, quote, moderate can have 5 different levels within that rating. We talked about the conditions of moderate plus. It's the situation where the snowpack and the weather is set up so that human triggered avalanches are likely, but natural avalanches are probably unlikely. There's really not a rating that matches that scenario in our 5-tiered system. This is why it's so important that you look at both the danger scale and you read the accompanying bulletin to determine where the problem actually is and where on the scale we really are. This sample or this graph from the Colorado Avalanche Information Center further illustrates just how dangerous the moderate rating can be, with the vast majority of fatalities occurring under that rating. Don't let your guard down over just one word. For years, I operated on a low or moderate means I can do it. Anything higher than that, and I would just avoid going into steep terrain. But the danger scale doesn't say don't go under a considerable rating. If you look closely under the travel advice for considerable, it says careful snowpack observations, cautious route finding, and conservative decision-making are essential. One of the most important changes between moderate and considerable is the fact that natural avalanches are now possible. You don't need to be the trigger. You don't even need to be in steep terrain to get hit by an avalanche. What's that above you? Traveling in avalanche terrain under a considerable rating requires training and experience. When you think about the progression of risk or danger from low to high, it's not a linear progression. Risk increases exponentially between the levels. Moderate is not just twice as dangerous as low. Considerable is probably 3 or 4 times more risky than moderate. My third and last case in point regarding a moderate rated day occurred on April 11th, 2019, when I managed to remotely trigger a sizable wind slab above me and bury myself up to my waist. It's me there in the center of the photo. That little tree just uphill of me protected me from taking a pretty big ride down to the bottom of Oaks Gulf. This was also a sad day for Northeastern backcountry. For our community, as a few ravines over around the same time, we lost a young man, Nicholas Benedict, who had triggered and been fully buried in an avalanche. So personally, in my 20 years of playing in avalanche terrain, I've witnessed 9 people get caught and carried, 2 people killed, and a third one that I didn't witness, and personally and unintentionally triggered 2 avalanches, one that carried me a short distance and one that didn't carry me but buried me to my waist. The one thing that was common between all of these incidents is it was under a moderate rating. So I've had some of my best backcountry ski days during high danger. That's right, you heard me right. High danger means they're definitely gonna happen. Avalanche is gonna happen, so I'm gonna go skiing and I'm gonna avoid all potential avalanche terrain. Granite Backcountry Alliance glades or run on the Sherby. I'm gonna keep it super chill and hopefully live to ski another day. The North American Avalanche Danger Scale is more than just 5 color-coded words. It gives specific travel advice. It looks at the likelihood of avalanches separately, both natural and human triggered, because the distinction is a big deal, especially when it comes to planning your route. And it talks about the size and distribution of these things. Are they all over the place or just confined to one aspect? Confined to one elevation? Can I avoid these areas? That comes down to terrain choice. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Blake and Nick to help us learn how to properly identify avalanche terrain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was incredibly helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time to, again, go through not only low, moderate, considerable, high, extreme, et cetera, but then some of the details that are embedded in there. Because again, the natural avalanche is likely, human triggered likely, all those words mean something and they're really important. And I find myself sometimes just becoming really complacent and guilty of just looking at the color, moderate, considerable, okay, but not actually thinking about what that really means. So thank you for reminding us all tonight of what is actually embedded in that rating. Nick, I will not steal your thunder any longer. I'll save that for the rest of our season together. So Nick, you're up.
All right, great. Thanks, Blake. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for being here. And thanks to the crew that puts on ESAW for inviting me to do a short presentation this evening. So my name is Nick Aiello-Popio, and I live here in Conway, I guess not far from Dave and a bunch of these guys. And so there's snow on the ground this morning when I left my house for work. So, you know, winter is definitely coming. And I'm going to be doing a short presentation this evening that's all about identifying where avalanche terrain is. And rather than doing in 15 minutes a very broad overview, I'm going to stick to, I decided to pick out just a few parts of this large topic that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about kind of some general personal theory, also known as Nick's BS theories, as to how to determine what to be paying attention to in avalanche terrain. And then specifically to avalanche terrain, I want to talk about how slope angle affects where avalanche terrain is, and then about how trees and rocks can help or hinder us when traveling in avalanche terrain, because that's a topic that I see tripping people up quite a bit. So I'm going to try to do screen sharing here to see my little presentation. And if you've ever seen me speak, you know that I have extremely dry and boring presentations. And so, you know, just hold those eyelids open, and hopefully it won't be too bad here. And here we go. Okay, so my presentation, this is official airy stuff. This is called Where is the Angry Snow by Nick Aiello-Popio. So we're going to get into it. When you're traveling in the backcountry, you have a number of dangers. You know, traveling in the backcountry is dangerous. The mountains are very dangerous. And so all you have to ask yourself really when you're in the backcountry is, where is the danger? So, you know, it's a pretty simple solution, right? So like in this picture here, my buddy Michael took this picture when we were in Peru a year or so ago. So, you know, where is the danger? Well, in many cases, when you're in the backcountry, the danger is actually all around you. You have many things in the mountains that are kind of competing for your attention in terms of how to stay safe. And in this picture, you know, you got crevasses below, avalanches above,
hey,
ice
Nick.
fall.
Hey, buddy,
Yeah.
this slide didn't move over.
Oh, it didn't move over.
We're still on Where's the Angry Snow.
Oh, you're still on Where's the Angry Snow? Interesting. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Blake.
Yeah, no problem.
Any better here? Have we changed at all? All right. Stand by. I'm getting technical assistance. All right. What are you seeing, Blake?
The mountains are dangerous.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see. And are we moving along here at all?
No.
Oh, bummer. All right. Well, let me go back. Let me go to new share here and try this again. And we're going to go to Keynote and share. All right. And let me know if anything is moving yet, Blake.
Still on mountains are dangerous.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I apologize for this. Give me just 1 second. This is... All right. Hopefully we'll try to share the whole screen here. I think the computer thinks that the pop-ups from other things are competing for attention. All right, Blake. So are we at the first page here?
First page, yep.
All right. Anything moving?
Yep.
All right. All right. We'll try this again.
Yeah.
Still move. Okay. Thanks. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. So where's the danger, right? You've got all these different things basically competing to kill you in the mountains. And what are we going to pay the most attention to? So we've got limited energy for paying attention to avalanches. As much as avalanche instructors like myself would love to make it sound like we all have 8 hours a day just to think about avalanches, you also have to do things like not fall into crevasses or not freeze your toes off or not get frostbite on your face because you're on Mount Washington almost any day of the year. So in my theory, when I'm thinking about avalanches, I have a couple of different options. And Blake's going to roll his eyes when he sees me say this for the 500th time. I can be like a floodlight where I'm throwing my energy, I'm casting my gaze kind of in all directions. But really, I want to use my energy wisely. I want to be more like a spotlight. And so one way that I try to focus my observations like a spotlight when I'm traveling in avalanche terrain is by having a good idea of where the avalanche terrain is going to be. A lot of times when you're looking at the mountains, this is, I think later that same day in Peru, your attention might be drawn to immediately to, you know, the big, cool, steep stuff on the mountains as being the place where the avalanches are going to happen. But if you're looking at this photograph here, on this day, only like less than an hour after this photo was taken, we actually nearly triggered an avalanche and turned right around, and our month-long trip to South America all just to climb this one mountain ended that very same day because of the avalanche conditions. And the spot where we were when we had a huge woomph in the snowpack was actually all the way down here on the lower angle terrain. So slope angle can be very important when you're trying to figure out where the most dangerous avalanche terrain is. And in general, you need to stay focused on the terrain that you're traveling through for where the avalanche hazard is, not just be looking up at the steeper, gnarlier, cooler stuff above you yet to come. When we're talking about angles for avalanches, you can see this graph here is showing the percentage of accidents and what the slope angle was in the start zone, the area where that avalanche was initiated. Most people, of course, initiating the avalanche that entrains themselves or their companions, rather than avalanches being kind of a random thing that comes down and hits you. Most people that are in an avalanche, they or someone else in their party triggers it. And you can see that slope angles of between 30 degrees and 40, 45 degrees, that's where we see a lot of these human-involved avalanche accidents. And there are a lot of geographic variations to this, including here in the Northeast, where we do have avalanches on these somewhat steeper slopes. The way that you're going to determine the angle of a slope you're on, we used to tell people, oh, you use a clinometer, you know, like the BCA one in the top left there, it's a little ball bearing, and you line up the clinometer with the slope. Well, it's 2020, and not only do we have pandemics, but we also have technology, as we're all using tonight. So a lot of the time now, I've switched over just to using apps like Carpenter's Level or the Measure app on your smartphone, because you always have a smartphone with you in the backcountry, because if it's not on Instagram, it basically never happened. And so now we can also use these for helping to measure slope angle. Other technology that we use is probably going to be mentioned many times during ESAW are websites such as caltopo.com. And what I've done here is we're looking at part of Mount Washington, and inset towards the bottom, I've highlighted the key that's actually in the top right that shows what the different colors on this map mean. And on caltopo.com, you can click on this button called slope angle shading, and it's going to highlight the different slope angles of the terrain in different colors. And you can see that these angles roughly correspond to where we're going to find a lot of avalanches. So even just from the comfort of your living room in the morning, you can look at the terrain you're planning to travel into and click slope angle shading, and you can get a pretty decent idea of where the slopes are steep enough to cause an avalanche. But steepness isn't the whole name of the game, but it's a pretty big part of it. And when you start clicking on slope angle shading or measuring with your clinometer or your smartphone the slope angles, you start to realize that a lot of the places that we travel to in the backcountry, the slopes that are most appealing to us as skiers and riders, slopes in that 30 to 45 degree area, are also the slopes that avalanches love to use the most as well. So it's an important thing to realize that the same slopes that attract us for their angle for steep, but maybe not quite extreme skiing, 30 to 45 degree slopes especially, are the same slopes that avalanches love to hang out on. So avalanches, to me, they're kind of like when you have like that kid in wrestling class and gym class who's a lot bigger than the rest of the kids, and he wants to wrestle too, but he kind of doesn't realize that he's so much bigger. Well, avalanches are like that too. They love hanging out on the exact same slopes that we do. Like, look at this avalanche. He's having a great time. He's like, yeah, this is the best, sliding downhill. It's awesome. You know, he's got a selfie stick there. He's got a mustache. He's clearly a hipster. So avalanches love to hang out on the exact same slopes we do. It's just that they're so much bigger than us, they don't realize that they can hurt us. So it's a sad story, really. The avalanches, they just want to go. They want to be on Instagram with us too, and you know, they're just too big. So you know, it's a tough story, but it's something important to realize. Avalanches love the same slope angles that we do. Now, a lot of times I hear people say, well, yeah, the avalanche danger is elevated today, so I'm just going to stick to the trees. And what they mean by that is I'm going to kind of ski near the little shrubs and crumults on the side of Hillman's Highway, which is, you know, a huge avalanche path in Tuckerman Ravine. Trees and also rocks, they trip people up quite a bit. In general, if you're going to be using trees for your protection when skiing, from your protection from avalanches, they need to be much, much more dense than you would expect. The steeper the slope you're on, the denser the trees need to be. So for a given rule of thumb, and I'm not a huge fan of rules of thumb, but a way that I like to think about, are these trees dense enough to actually act as anchors on a slope? If the trees are so dense that you have trouble skiing downhill through them, or at least it's not very fun, then those trees are probably dense enough that they're having something of an anchoring effect on the slope. The same is true for boulders or huge rocks that stick up through the snowpack. If the trees are so far spread out that you can ski down through them, having a great time skiing kind of fast and having fun, then those trees may not be tight enough to actually have an anchoring effect on the snowpack. So for instance, here's me and my buddy Ryan going to ski South Gully in Huntington Ravine. So yeah, we're around some trees and we're around some rocks, but these trees are definitely not big enough, strong enough, or dense enough to have any sort of an anchoring effect on the snowpack. And then here's one of the classic examples you see on Mount Washington all the time. Identities have been redacted for privacy, of course. So here we have a whole bunch of people in Tuckerman Ravine, and they are hiking up, adjacent to some trees or rocks. Being adjacent to trees or rocks, or being just up on the side of Hillman's Highway or Wright Gully or something, standing, kind of close to a tree, it offers no protection at all. And in some cases, in certain conditions, being close to trees and rocks, that may actually be a spot where you're more likely to trigger an avalanche than not. So trees and rocks are a double-edged sword in many regards. And if you want trees or rocks if you are looking for trees or rocks that are dense enough to have an anchoring effect on the snowpack, then they need to be much more dense than you would generally think. Another way, if I'm traveling through a wooded area, but I'm on a slope that's steep enough to slide, if I can reach out with using my ski poles to extend my reach, if I can't be touching two trees or two huge boulders simultaneously with my ski poles at any point, if sometimes they're out of reach with that extended reach, then they're definitely not dense enough to be having that anchoring effect on the snowpack. And those trees and rocks may instead be potential areas where I'd be more likely to actually trigger an avalanche. Anyway, avalanche, figuring out where the avalanche terrain is, it can be easy sometimes when you're on really huge peaks. So climb a 6,000 meter peak in the Himalaya with my buddy Justin, yeah, we definitely could tell where a lot of the avalanche terrain was. Other times though, I've scared myself and had really close calls on much smaller peaks and smaller terrain just here in New England. So even where that arrow's pointing, just down below that rise on the Lion's Head summertime trail before the winter route was even open, I once triggered an avalanche that nearly swept me off a cliff. Other times, sometimes the most scared of my life I've been in terms of triggering avalanches has actually been below tree line, like some of these gullies on approaches at Lake Willoughby. So even when you're below tree line or on a relatively small peak, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need to be aware of when you're in avalanche terrain. And knowing when you're in avalanche terrain allows you to really focus your attention and have that spotlight effect to know where to be paying attention and where to be exerting your mental resources, because there are so many hazards in the mountains and we only have a given amount of energy to be paying attention to avalanches. So anyway, that's just a little bit about how to determine where avalanche terrain is when you're traveling in the backcountry. So thanks again, everyone. And I'm really looking forward to this question and answer session coming up as well.
Thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate it, bud. The dry humor, and I'm not really sure how you figured out how to get the selfie stick and the little like talking bubble above the avalanche, but that was top notch. That was. Yeah,
no, some heroes don't wear capes, Blake, and.
All right. Well, with that, Tyler, you are up next.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, that was awesome, Nick. My name's Tyler from East Coast Avalanche Education. Just want to thank everyone for having me here. Thanks to the White Mountain Avalanche Education Fund, Mount Washington Avalanche Center, American Avalanche Association, Blake, Frank, Joe, everyone else who worked tirelessly get this thing going. It's a lot of work to get all these people together. So that's really awesome. You know, Dave talked about moderate danger, which is really cool because considerable, it seems like, gets so much attention. You know, different tools we use mentions considerable, you know, it gets so much attention. So moderate is really, really awesome to hear you guys talking about moderate a bit more. And, you know, he mentioned April 11th, 2019, which I'm sure a lot of us kind of know happened that day with the accident up there. And I'm going to use that forecast as we kind of talk about how to read a forecast tonight. And I'm going to pull up a screen share right now of that. We can kind of work off that day. You guys all see the forecast for Thursday, April 11th, 2019 on there? Cool. But let's back up a minute though too, because sometimes you might not even know where to go to get to this point. So if you're unsure, the nearest Avalanche center, you can go to avalanche.org. That's a really great starting point. From there, you can select any forecast center in the United States on a map. You can get linked right to that Avalanche forecast center. From the home page of that center, you can click the read more button on the advisory or select a specific region. Some forecast center websites will look a bit different, but all will share many of the similarities, including danger ratings, avalanche problems, weather, trends. So just keep in mind, they might not all be in the same exact order, but they'll have all that kind of information as you go through them. So when do you get the forecast? That's kind of the next topic. First thing I do when I get to the forecast, I'm looking at the date and the time, making sure that you're not looking at yesterday's forecast. You know, Mount Washington Avalanche Center, typically this was posted 6:59. I was gonna say 7 o'clock is typically when a lot of forecast centers get that morning product out. You know, some forecast centers will have an early morning forecast. So be in mind that might be available for you depending on where you're at. But if you're looking for that forecast, usually about 7 o'clock, that'll get published a little later, a little earlier. And then in terms of the year, like what time of the year, typically when the snow's on the ground, you know, November to April, some areas in the Pacific Northwest, like around the Mount Shasta area, Mount Shasta Avalanche Center, they might go a little longer, but kind of that November to April window is where a lot of avalanche forecast centers will be publishing the advisories. So first thing you'll typically see when looking at a forecast is either a danger level or color or the bottom line. So on the Mount Washington Avalanche Center forecast here for April 11th, we're seeing the bottom line. And I can just read this to you guys real quick here. But temperatures have continued to fall since yesterday, resulting in a sketchy mix of wind-scoured, bulletproof ice crust, and fresh wind slabs. Areas that contain these wind slabs have moderate avalanche danger due to the possibility of human-triggered avalanches. Steep terrain without well-bonded new snow will have significant sliding fall hazard. Don't count on arresting a fall on the icy surfaces beneath this new snow. Even a small avalanche can cause a significant problem today. A brief window of sunshine and warm temperatures may bring some softening this afternoon, but consider your options if it does not. And bear in mind that the new wind slabs will weaken if and when they warm today. So that's a really good kind of place to start there on the bottom line, giving you a lot of information in that paragraph. You know, it's talking about what kind of problem are you dealing with? Are you dealing with a dry loose, a wet loose, a wind slab? You know, around here, wind slab is so common. And whenever you see that slab in the name, we're not gonna get too deep into these problems right now, but whenever you see that slab, that's something to really take note of. You know, it's not gonna be manageable. It's something that you really have to pay attention when you see that persistent slab, wind slab, storm slab. It's different problem from dry loose or wet loose. So keep in mind when you do see that slab, that should hopefully trigger something for you. What's the distribution of the problem? We're talking about certain aspects and elevations. Is this only on south aspects we have to worry about? We're looking for north. So just keep an eye on the aspect and elevation. Where's that problem located. The bottom line might also include information about the weather. Might talk about temperature, new snow. Might go on to talk about even how much confidence that the forecaster has in the advisory. If the confidence is low, maybe we got to think about taking a step back, because that forecast is only really one tool in your toolbox. You should always be on the lookout for other signs of instability. If the rating for a day is low and you're out there and all of a sudden the storm comes in sooner or it warms up more than expected and things start coming unglued, you need to be able to make your own observations and adapt to the changing conditions. So even though it's low, it's not just green light all the time. You know, you got to really be still on guard and making those observations. As this one guy I kind of have a man crush on, Drew Hardesty from the UAC, says, every forecast is an opportunity for a forecaster to make a mistake. So you can't just be 100% relying on that forecast. As we kind of go down the forecast here, we're getting into mountain weather. That's going to contain more detailed information on precipitation, the type. We're talking about snow, rain, the rate, super high PI rates, precipitation intensity. Is it really coming down hard, or are we just talking about some flurries? The amount of precipitation, you know, for example, maybe 12 inches over 24 hours. What's going on with the winds, the speed, the direction, the duration? How long is it going to be blowing? That can tell you about where the snow's moving, where is it transporting to and from. Talk about the temperatures, highs, lows, visibility, cloud cover. Maybe today's a better day to ski in the trees. You know, maybe it's sunny. Maybe it is a good day to go in the Alpines. That will give you an idea of what kind of terrain you should be looking for. Forecast will then go on to start talking about your problems. Could have more than one problem. You might have two problems. You might just have one problem, depending on the day. For this problem, wind slab was the main one. You know, it's for this day, giving you east aspects over 3,500 feet, you know, possible. Looking at the size, when you're looking at the size, you might also see a destructive force in there, or D range. That's referring to how destructive the avalanche is. Is it a D1 avalanche, relatively harmless, or is it a D5 where it can gouge the landscape? You know, how likely is it? What size is it going to be? All really important things as we're trying to make that plan for the day. We'll go into the forecast discussion next, and we're going to have some more detailed information about what's going on for that specific day. I might talk about recent observations. These are really great to read, even if you're not in the mountain every day. I'd advise everyone, you know, even if you're just not going skiing today, maybe not tomorrow, just wake up, read the forecast. If you have time at night, go through every observation. Look at every observation. You know, Frank has started a really good observation program in the last couple of years, and you know, he weeds out the bad ones. So everything on there is high quality, and you got a lot of good media. You got pictures, videos, so that can make it really nice to stay on top of the snowpack. We'll talk about recent avalanches in that discussion. We'll talk about accidents and close calls. We can also talk about some things that might not be necessarily avalanche conditions, but slide for life conditions, which is really the main contributor to accidents, not just in Mount Washington, but slide for life or slip and fall kind of accidents in mountain environments are always a kind of like that top statistic for types of accidents. So slide for life conditions. Do you need axes, crampons when you're in that terrain? Keep in mind, having the tools isn't just enough. You got to know how to use them. So make sure that's addressed in your group or individually, however you're going out there. Is there any red tape or closures? The additional information at the bottom of the forecast will also talk about, you know, coverage on the trails. How's the Gulf of Slides trail doing? What's the coverage look like? Certain openings or closings. If you're in another avalanche forecast center, you know, maybe there's a Department of Transportation that you need to stay on top of. Maybe, you know, they're closing the road, you know, at some time. Maybe there's backcountry closures in place, and you got to be aware of where those are. They'll typically have a link to the Department of Transportation from there. At the bottom of the page, if we keep scrolling down, you'll get a lot of good information from different weather stations, and you get temperature, precipitation, all kinds of things. So this is really good to kind of dive in a little bit deeper, and then you can link off here to a bunch of other really good resources. But this is kind of your one-stop shop in the morning for where you're going to get all your information. I don't know if anyone else has any questions about the advisory, but that's kind of what I had for the forecast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tyler. I really, really appreciate it. I'd just like to note that one of the things Tyler mentioned that I think is incredibly helpful, certainly we're getting better at it here on the East Coast, but particularly, correct me if I'm wrong, but Tyler, you spend a lot of time out in Utah. I'm always impressed with the folks in Utah, Colorado, Montana, are the reports that we get from the general community. Frank and his team are a small crew. And that might mean that if you decide to go ski on the west side, Monroe Brook, you decide to go ski Gulf of Slides, we have a limited number of resources to get up into the terrain. But Tyler might have been there yesterday and gotten some really good data for all of us to use. So the forecast can seem as overwhelming, I think, sometimes, especially when we first start to interact with it. But as Tyler mentioned, the longer we spend with it, the more information we can get from it and the better decisions we can make in the field. So please take the time to look through that carefully. And thank you for mentioning that, Tyler. That's super helpful.
Yeah, that's really important. Kind of one part of that too is how open the community has been in the last 5-10 years with close calls, reporting avalanche. You know, it might not be a huge avalanche, but still, like, the community has kind of changed a little bit, I think, over the years, and people are more open to talking about those close calls, near misses. Hopefully someone can learn from what happened. So that's awesome to see.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Tyler. Bridget and Frank, we've got questions now, I believe.
Yeah, we do. Let's see, let's take them a few at a time here. Maybe this one would probably be best addressed to you, Nick. Can you explain the anchoring effect a little more?
Oh, yeah. So what I mean by anchoring is whether we are expecting trees or rocks or other features of the terrain to act like a whole bunch of thumbtacks, pinning the snow down to the slope. And I say this a lot, and if you've heard me before, you might be tired of it, but I often think, do I have a lot of these anchors where they're so close together that they're acting like thumbtacks, pinning the snow down to the slope? Or do I have relatively few where instead of acting as thumbtacks pinning all the snow down, where instead have all these pinpricks coming out through the snow, where if there's a slab avalanche problem, any of these pinpricks could be potential weak areas. So maybe Frank, if you might have a better way of explaining this than me, but my thought is that when I say anchor, I'm meaning, is there a physical feature like a thick tree or a large, huge, immovable boulder that can actually be stabilizing the snow? Or that's what I mean by anchor.
Yeah, that's a good explanation, Nick. And another way around it, or think about it, is that the way I think about it, some of those things that are sometimes considered anchors is if there's not a lot of boulders or trees in the snow, it essentially perforates the slab like a postage stamp, and tends to, the slab cracks and connects all those features. You can see that pretty darn clearly in a lot of the photos that we've gathered around here of avalanches. Those objects represent weak spots in that slab. Just as a side note, I've heard too that not only is angle and density important, but tree type is also to some degree important. I've heard this said, and I think it's true, but it's also splitting hairs and kind of a dangerous thing to hang your hat on, that fir trees with branches, fir boughs sweeping down into the snow are going to hold a slab a little bit better than a grove of aspen trees. Yeah. Either way, if it's you really want that treed slope to be dense enough that you can't move through it or ski through it comfortably to feel any sort of comfort from those anchors.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have a tendency, and I certainly do, to be tree optimists and say, oh yeah, no, this little shrub I'm standing next to, this will keep me safe. And I think you only need to see an avalanche come down, for instance, Hillman's Highway, and see how far that debris goes up the sides of the avalanche path and through all that crumbles, or see some trees snap to really understand just how little effect some of this shrubbery has on anchoring the snowpack.
Yeah, absolutely. Our gullies tend to fill up with running avalanche debris. So you might think you're on the edge, but in reality, that terrain acts like a funnel and fills right up and can easily sweep you, even if you're on the edges. Thanks. We got another question here about guiding. Basically, someone asked, they sounds like they don't have a lot of partner opportunities, and asked whether it's, kind of a normal thing to pay for a guide to just go out for a day. And I'll answer that one. I would say, Patrick, that is a great use of your money. I oftentimes think back to when I was just starting out. If I had the dough, I could have saved myself a lot of pain and shortcut, some of my hard learnings early on if I had gone out with better, a better skier. And a professional guide is a great place to go for that, and people with the right certifications and experience can help you a lot and make your outing safer in the long run. So money well spent. Big fan of education. Quite a few more here. Let's see. Someone asked, is there any truth to a slope being safer if it's been skied recently? Not total risk mitigation, but better. I would, I'll let somebody else take a crack at that one, but I have some thoughts on that as well. Dave, do you want to talk about that? About basically skier, probably, skier compaction, and if somebody's been on a slope.
Okay, yeah, sure. I was working on a response to Chris's question that was up front there, but yeah, definitely I could talk to that. Whether or not someone skied something does not, actually, here's the quote I'm thinking of. Ski tracks on a slope are not signs of stability. Ski tracks on a slope are just ski tracks on a slope. Maybe they didn't find the thin part of the snowpack where you could initiate a collapse in a buried weak layer and propagate a failure and cause an avalanche. There's many, many pictures that we use in these avalanche courses that show 4, 5, 6 beautiful stacked tracks next to each other. And then the 7th track down found a buried rock and ripped out a monster avalanche. So yeah, I'll say the answer to that question is it's not safer because it's been skied recently. If I see 60 people ski it, I'm going to feel good about it, but I'm not going to look at a couple of tracks and make a decision based off that.
Yeah, I think that captures the most important, the meat of that question, Chris. And I think one other thing that you may have noticed, and I think a lot of spring skiers will benefit from, is a wet loose avalanche problem here. And we see that frequently here in the spring is, the first few people on the slope can generate quite a bit of slough, which technically is an avalanche. In some cases, it can be dangerous if it pushes you somewhere you don't want to go, like a crevasse or into some rocks. And then subsequent skiers don't have to deal with quite as much of that wet loose. But overall, you definitely don't want to count on other people having skied the slope as some indicator that that slope is safe. Someone asked, where are the best places to access a forecast if we don't have internet access and it's not posted at the trailhead? For example, camping at a remote base. So really, that is a good question to sort out before your trip. I know that the Mount Washington Avalanche Center, we email forecasts out if you sign up for that service. So you may be able to get an email somewhere in the woods at some point if you had a cell phone, a spot where you get cell phone coverage, or on your drive up, for instance. But really, if you don't have the internet and there's no hard posting, which is unusual here, that's one of the only places you'll ever see a written forecast posted at a trailhead, you're kind of out of luck. Occasionally, hut keepers, if you're traveling, can give you some of that information. Sometimes it's not the actual forecast, it might just be their opinion. So you want to make sure that that information that you're getting is the right information and reliable information.
And Frank, I also have a thought on that.
Yeah.
Well, just that satellite communication devices now cost less than DINAFIT bindings, and so they're so cheap, especially the devices where you can communicate by text message, which I use a lot. And then your only task becomes having a friend who does have service, who knows that you're going to text them for an update in the morning about the weather forecast, the avalanche forecast. I've used that extensively, and they work really well and anywhere you have a view of the sky.
Awesome. Yeah, great tip. Heck, thanks.
Hey, Frank. Just really quickly, I think somebody asked a little while ago, Brandon, sorry if I'm not getting the name right, about books that are helpful. I just grabbed 2 off the shelf. The Avalanche Handbook is a really, really good one. It is very dense. This is a reference guide. It's not something to be read cover to cover in one sitting, but really helpful. And the other one that I think is really important, and I thank John Tierney for showing me or telling me about this book, but is Backcountry Skiing, all right, skills for ski touring and ski mountaineering, because this goes into, there's a discussion about avalanche talk as well, but it also goes into type of gear that you need, what you're putting in your first aid kit, types of kick turns, everything that you can imagine that seems really simple initially, and then all of a sudden you get into it, it's really complex. So again, those 2 are the Avalanche Handbook, really dense, and then Backcountry Skiing Skills, and a long title for ski touring and ski mountaineering. And I'll type that into the chat, but I just want to throw that out there.
Great, thanks, Blake. Got one here for, Tyler, you want to address this? Sorry, hang on. I just lost it. Well, yeah, how about this? Can you talk about speed as it relates to avalanche risk? And I assume, oh no, it was a softening question. Well, we'll go with this. Can you talk about speed as it relates to avalanche risk? And I assume that this person means speed of the skier or rider.
I don't know if I understand the question fully there, Frank. That speed of the
skier or rider relative to avalanche risk. And I've heard this before. I think it has to do with, like, basically, can you outrun an avalanche, or maybe if you wanted to get really technical, does your stress bulb change?
I mean, you should never expect to be able to run an avalanche. If that's kind of the question, I'd say, yeah, no, you're not gonna. I mean, maybe some time in place, but that can't be in your bag of tricks. Avoiding avalanches, you gotta do other things. You gotta pick your terrain right. That's the one thing you can control. So, yeah.
So that's a common misnomer, and I think it's worth talking about maybe just a little bit, is that I think there's some false, some things that people pick up from watching pro riders when they're watching the latest TGR Matchsticks film. These guys look like they're alone. They look like they're on this big, huge peak. The reality is they've done some really detailed assessment before they go out on those slopes. They may even choose to ski something knowing that it's gonna avalanche. But what's important to remember is that they 9 times out of 10 have a team of rescuers right over the ridge. I had a friend who served in that role once who would just sweep down and take care of that person and dig them out, for one. And secondly, they decided they understood the avalanche hazard well enough that they could pretty well predict that it was going to be a small, probably survivable avalanche. So, you know, they're going very fast to create good footage for you. Not something that your average person out skiing would want to do. Certainly not your average backcountry skier is going to do, where, you know, your day and everybody else's day is ruined, even if you just break a binding, much less your leg.
Yeah, and maybe one thing I'd add to that, Frank, too, is, you know, trauma might not be as much of an issue out west and in Alaska, where you are seeing these huge runouts, but it seems to me, it seems like some of the numbers are showing that trauma is maybe a little bit more of an issue on the East Coast. Trees, rocks, all kinds of stuff in the way. So you might not always be able to make that clean exit.
Yeah, Tyler, that's exactly what I was going to say. Imagine the speed that it would take to actually outrun that thing, and then apply that to our terrain and snowpack. You would, it would not be a good scene. Yeah.
So here's a good question about the danger scale from Chris Bush. It seems the danger scale applies to relatively large areas. Do you think it hides the complexities of terrain for some people? I would think, Chris, actually it hides complexity of the terrain for all of us. The danger scale really is sort of a base level snapshot of what the overall hazard or risk that you're going to be exposed to, and hazard you're going to be exposed to in the most dangerous area potentially. So someone said once that if, you know, avalanches, that problem are going to be or avalanches are going to be a problem the day you're going out, then terrain is your solution. So you need to seek out that terrain that's not going to have avalanches and create those problems for yourself. Someone else asked if we want to almost completely avoid any AVI risk, is the SHRB a safe bet? Yeah, I would say, you know, to my knowledge, nothing, I've never seen or heard of an avalanche on the Sherburne. It's just not steep enough. And yes, you can there. Other area ski trails, such as the Gulf of Slides ski trail, you can ski that trail and also expose yourself to avalanche risk at the upper reaches where those avalanche paths do reach that trail. Really important to understand that. There's a turnaround point kind of high, 2/3, 3/4 of the way up Gulf Slides, and at that point you're crossing an active avalanche path. Anyone else want to contribute to that?
Maybe just saying that that in a mountain environment, you're never going to be able to get that 100% certainty. You know, I feel like a lot of people taking level 1 classes are always looking for that. Oh, I just want that like 100%, you know, never going to get caught in an avalanche. It's like, if you want that, you just got to stay away from the mountains, because you know, anytime you enter an environment like that, you know, there are exceptions. Talking Frank about, you know, the Sherby and, you know, some Granite Mountain line, you know, certain terrain, but it's a mountain environment, so it's variable. Things can happen.
Yeah, these lower angle spots are a good way to reduce your risk. Obviously, you need to think about first aid issues and hitting a tree and all kinds of other things that can hurt you. So, being prepared. We talk about a lot about avalanche training, and really first aid training is equally important. Even staying outside of avalanche terrain, you can still have pretty significant issues. In ungroomed terrain, you're more likely to run into trouble.
Hey, Frank, we probably have time for one more. Sorry.
Okay. So when will Mount Washington Avalanche Center begin forecasts? That really depends on the season, Cole. Thanks for that question. We tend to wait. It's important to realize that we're not doing a condition report to tell you when it's the snow is good enough to go skiing. I know that's seems like it sometimes. We do like to see people do that, but certainly avalanches are going to occur before we start forecasting. They do pretty much every year. So it's important to realize that we have a lot of operational things that drive our decision to start forecasting. I don't know if you realize, but last year we were forecasting until June due to that winter. So we have to be careful to not overextend ourselves in that season with just the employees that we have and the amount of terrain and the workload. We have to kind of be careful. So, as a rule of thumb, I know I'm probably making Nick cringe with this rule of thumb, but as a rule of thumb, when 50% or more of our kind of major avalanche paths are full and someone could recreate top to bottom of them on them, we're going to start thinking about it. We're going to get close there. The other thing is whether or not you can ski all the way out to the Sherburne. That seems to be generally about when we're starting to forecast. And I don't mean skiing on the Sherburne in 6 inches of snow with weeds and rocks poking out of it. When a reasonable person would start skiing the Sherburne. Not saying anything bad, Blake. Don't take that personally.
Totally fine, Frank.
Hey, just a quick follow-up on the questions. We're going to copy the questions that we have and post them online with some answers from the panelists. And then we're also recording this, and there'll be a link to that recording for anyone that wants to rewatch Nick or any of these guys. And we'll get that up on the website in the next few days.
All right. Joe, we ready to start wrapping things up?
Yeah.
Okay. I just have a few more thoughts before we finish. Again, thank you so much to everybody that attended tonight. And again, a huge thanks to all of our speakers. I think that's one of the awkward things about Zoom. I guess we could clap, it'd be kind of strange. But we'll just imagine that all 372 of you are clapping right now for all of the presenters tonight. Really, really, really appreciate their time and energy. I know it might seem sometimes like a simple thing, but the amount of work that all of these professionals have to put in to go through not only their professional courses, but then their continuing education each year. Again, it is a phenomenal amount of information, a phenomenal amount of hard work to get to the places that they're at in their careers. So thank you so much for sharing your time and insights with us. Thanks again to Black Diamond. Again, we will pick one random person who signed up for tonight, and they will be the lucky winner of a brand new beacon. And thanks again to Tyler for helping us out with that. Please join us on November 17th through 19th for the full ESAW events. Again, I think I can safely speak for everybody on the panel tonight. Our education is ongoing day to day, year to year. It just continues to evolve. There's no set point, kind of, I think, as Tyler alluded to, like where you're just all of a sudden done with your learning experience. So things like the upcoming ESAW event, taking a full ARI level 1, going to different talks and discussions throughout the winter, those are all part of our shared learning experience. So please join us November 17th through 19th as well. I think I had 2 more notes. Yes, fingers crossed for a deep and safe winter. That it goes without saying. And I think that's about it.